back to Psychedelics today. We are actually starting a new segment, which I'm calling Vital Psychedelic Conversations, in honor of a new program that we're launching called Vital. And for our first guest here, I'm really excited to have Dr. Joe Tafur on. Dr. Tafur, do you want to give a little intro on who you are and some of your work if people don't know anything about you?
Sure. I am Dr. Joe Tafur. I am a Colombian-American family physician, now in the integrative medicine program at U of A, University of Arizona. And also somebody that has become an ayahuasquero or a curandero, like traditional healer with ayahuasca ceremony and traditional Amazonian plant medicine to a degree after training in Peru for a number of years. And I wrote a book about my training and my experience there and my kind of medical theories and ideas about spiritual healing called Fellowship of the River. And I also currently I run a nonprofit dedicated to demonstrating the value of spiritual healing in modern healthcare. And I'm also, one of the leaders of the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, which is a spiritual community based in Arizona that is actively pursuing legal, permission to practice ayahuasca ceremony in the United States.
Amazing. Any updates on that on your front? Any public updates, I should say.
Yeah, there's no major breakthroughs. We're simply we have, a strong legal team, and we're preparing, our position to potentially, discuss with the DEA and the Department of Justice, about who we are and what we're doing, what we'd like to do. There continues to be kind of a impasse with the DEA application for the exemption, the way like a research group would apply, to get an exemption to do a psilocybin study because it's Schedule 1 or MDMA study for that matter. But for the religious organizations or the spiritual organizations, that are practicing more kind of like an ancestral spiritual practice, kind of like the way the Native American Church exists in the United States, and then furthermore, the way the Unidade Vegetal, the UDV, the Brazilian church that utilizes ayahuasca, as well as Santo Daime, similarly Brazilian church that utilizes ayahuasca. The two ayahuasca utilizing churches did not go through an application process. They had to sue. Mm-hmm. And no one has actually been given for, religious exemption that permission. So it doesn't seem to be like a legitimate pathway at this time. So that's our concern. And what's more, there is there's no real way to do it. And so then one of the big caveats there is that as they have the exemption process, the way it's set up is that, the DEA, a law enforcement agency, is the one that determines your religious sincerity. And so then that's also kind of confusing and seems not quite appropriate.
Yeah, why does the DEA have any sort of say in that?
Well, because they've been given that task, so they don't want to do it either, I don't think. But it just so happens that after the UDV and the Santo Daime case, they decided, okay, and the DA is going to handle this. They're going to give exemptions the way they do for research. And then there was supposed to be some kind of legislation or some problem, from Congress, something to guide them further, which hasn't quite, taken shape. And so that doesn't really exist. So now they're just coming up with a thing based on some prior cases. And they just use that to deny, a group from Florida, which has its own, issues, of course, but they applied at the request of the DEA. And then were denied based on one of the arguments was religious sincerity. So it's well, how do you really determine that? And in a country where things are quite diverse, right, when it comes to different kinds of churches that exist and what do they do and what do they believe. And then our argument is that one of the issues is that where you have these two ayahuasca churches, or it's not the right way to say it, churches that use ayahuasca, like the UDV and the Santo Daime, as their sacrament. they have a Christian kind of a syncretic element, and so they've gone through this whole process. But then what of the ancestral tradition, that was the one that gave rise to their practice, Amazonian, traditional, indigenous practice like what we practice, that lineage that I'm a part of. What about that? Why does that, anyways, we have to go through the process. And so we're going through a process and we're trying our best.
Wonderful. I usually save this question to the end, but since we're on the topic, if anybody can help out, or do you accept donations or anything like that? How can people help you out in
We
this?
do accept donations for that process, and it's through the Church of Eagle and Condor.org. There's actually been a little problem with that process. For some reason, PayPal just canceled our account, and we're investigating that. Is that because of this? Is that because of what we're doing? I don't know.
I've been hearing more companies in this space. PayPal's been kind of shutting their accounts down, which is
Yeah, we got canceled.
bummer.
So we're in a little bit of a limbo. You can mail a check to us and contact us by email. We're also getting whatever it's going to be, Stripe, or we're going through some process to allow people to donate through the internet. We are a nonprofit church in Arizona, so you can deduct it from your taxes, but 501(c) status, which we were considering going after, but now they're denying people who are connected to psychedelics or psychedelic substances from applying. That's been happening, so that's not really an option for us. But as a church registered in the state of Arizona, we are tax exempt, and so people's donations to us are tax exempt. And you can get a receipt for that and use that. So we do accept donations. We have a big legal team. It's not easy to consider the options that we have in front of us and the potential expense, for a small community like ours to explore this. So yeah, we are open to donation.
Awesome.
By the way, on that note, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, our spiritual community, January 27th, also you can find it on the website churchofeagleandcondor.org. We're doing one of our first Wisdom of the Elders series. And so, one of our goals is to help bridge and open pathways to talk to, Native American elders, people with traditional and ancestral experience with ceremony, spiritual healing, etc., for these people that are, let's say, in psychedelic psychotherapy and other, or interested in this kind of thing, who have previously not had access, for all the historical reasons that hasn't happened. But Josie Begay James, a very amazing, beautiful, intelligent, wise woman, is going to be sharing with us January 27th. We're doing a webinar.
Awesome.
So maybe your community would be interested to really hear from a Navajo elder and who's open to share and to communicate and answer questions. So that's the kind of bridge work that we're trying to do, to open that path.
Wonderful. Yeah, I just stumbled across that. I just saw you posted, and I'm excited for that. And I think that's really important. And I think probably touches on the topics that you'll be exploring within our course about the importance of Indigenous wisdom. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of one of our big focus areas, and it's one of the focus areas of the spiritual community that I'm a part of, but also just in general, and my work with ayahuasca and plant medicine, and then my related work, as a doctor connected to psychedelic psychotherapy kind of fields. I just find that again and again and again and again and again and again, it's going to keep coming out in the psychedelic psychotherapy research world that, as we just had a brief discussion, Kyle and I, about, the venture capital and all that stuff. But, the substance itself, plays a role. But then there's no question that the context, is a huge factor. And the examples for this just go on and on and on and on. As far as, let's say, MDMA at a festival, MDMA at a big concert, a lot of fun, had a great time, but didn't cure PTSD per se. Maybe you made some gains, but you didn't turn people around their way. They're turning them around in the MAPS trial,
right?
Which is single-handedly shaking up the world. The reason that there is interest at this level from psychedelic venture capital and from all these people, really pushing into the psychedelic renaissance space, one of the major factors is the MAPS study. That just goes without saying. Their work with the PTSD people and the kind of results that they're getting is phenomenal. It's groundbreaking in mental health. And so then we have to look at what are they doing, so that they're making this incredible impact. And they have a 12-week intervention that involves, regular therapy and also the guidance of expert, guides, therapists through the process. And so the reality of that there's no getting away from that these people that they've chosen are really, really talented and gifted in the way that they work with people. And that's part of the success. So we know that, and then, the research is starting to explore those kind of topics. Like what I was just talking to some people from Johns Hopkins, very interesting research about, everyone's trying to figure out what's the mechanism for this stuff. And this idea is like you're opening up some kind of window that will allow for catalyze some kind of change, So when that window is kind of open, let's say, or with the assistance of psychedelics, what kind of change are you going to be able to catalyze?
Right.
And you see this very different, opportunity where it's like, okay, people are with this kind of direction, they're partying, they're having a great experience, maybe making some big memories, maybe they are shifting, some people are growing, maybe not. Yeah. And then, but on this other side, you have this high percentage of people really turning around like decades old, mental health issues. So it's like, okay, that's a big, big difference. So what's going on in those sessions? That has been kind of, and what's going on around those sessions? What the focus has been the substance.
Yeah,
everyone
there's so much other factors at play, right?
Yeah, they think they could sell it, whatever they want to do with it. But that other meat of what's happening with people is what, is there's a lot of mysterious elements in that space. Whether that's with MDMA, with psilocybin, with ketamine, in the kind of the research space, now growing into LSD and, other avenues of research. So what is it about that space and place and opening this window, and how do you help people through that kind of place? Well, there's a lot of experience, on the ancestral side, on the indigenous side, of what does that look like to guide people through those spaces and places, and not just like, in the case of the tradition that I'm a part of, like the ayahuasquero tradition, Shipibo tradition, it's like not only is like, okay, holding space and all that, but are there more advanced techniques?
Like,
is there more like things that are going to support facilitate and support somebody's process even further? For example, like singing Icaros, like at an advanced level, within a traditional kind of style that would that we hear that it is. That was a recent study that they did out of the Temple of the Way of Light in Peru. Deborah Gonzalez and her team just published on like following some people through that, and the people said, yeah, of course the ceremony and the healers played a major role in their
right
experience, major role. Like they attribute that to a major factor in what shaped things for them. So meaning that like advanced techniques of like, in other words, what's the difference between playing live music, playing CDs, while people go through a process, versus engaging them in the moment with techniques that are designed around addressing, energy in real time. Is that, that is the realm of ritual, and that's the realm of ritual.
Yeah. And I know some people talk about, to receive that healing within the ceremonial space, you don't even need to really take the medicine. So then it brings up the question, well, if people do receive healing in those spaces, what's going on there if they didn't ingest medicine from this from this narrative that the medicine is what's healing you? But what's going on when that's not the case? Somebody's just in that healing space or that ceremonial space.
The medicine is playing a role. The medicine is playing a role, and the medicine is also opening you to the, seems to open this window, catalyze and make it easier for that other healing to happen. So perhaps if the person, like we'd say, somebody's so open already, like it happens at the center in Peru where I used to work. Once somebody's there for a while, when they're there for a month, some of the people, they're so open, they've gone through the whole process, they're so tuned into it. So now just the song and the ceremony, they have visions, they have experiences, without drinking.
Yeah.
Ayahuasca in that case. So that's a thing, and so there, of course, there's many, many, many examples of that. And that kind of goes against, like, some of the, like, my thing is, like, spiritual materialism, where, like, the stoned ape theory stuff that, to me is, like, loses traction when you're see other spiritual traditions that don't use substance and,
right.
Get to very advanced states and places with themselves and with energy and all that stuff. So the idea is the medicine helps you to access something that's always there.
Right. Which is an important reminder, something that I often try to emphasize with folks, right? I'm curious, I've heard you just use this term window, and I wonder how you kind of contextualize that. Like, what do you mean by window? And I'm guessing, like, when I hear that, like,
this is still theoretical, and I don't want to, like, take away from this, just like this rumors through the research. I think they're still publishing it, but I mean it like, it's like the way I talk about it is this idea of, like, there's many different sides to it, right? There's, like, in our tradition, like, working with ayahuasca and as a sacrament, and as a spiritual connection, and that relationship becomes a huge factor in and of itself. And then when we look at, like, more broadly, that different practices that use, let's say, psychedelic substances, and then you have somebody like Terence McKenna say, and I always repeat it, he's like, these are deconditioning agents. So this idea that there are, like, windows in which we are conditioned, and that conditioning is stabilized. Like, let's say, in certain there's certain language, learning window that's, like, easier to learn a language as a child.
Yeah.
Right? And then that closes, and then it becomes harder to learn a language. It's not as easy as when you were a child. And then there's, like, people that try to create situations that would make it reopen. If you do this and do the binaural and do this and do that, all of a sudden, you're going to download this language right into your brain. That kind of thinking, right? That there would be a way to reopen the plasticity, the malleability of the system. And so we see examples of that with trauma. So trauma causing breaking through what is kind of a stable functioning system, and then when the trauma is enough, the system is reconditioned and now, in that sense, recalibrated, and now stabilizes in that other form of function. Right? That's like what we call allostatic load, or stress, wear and tear on the body, that then takes the system into that kind of, like, altered function. Well, some people might call it, like, maladaptive function. You adapt to whatever change, but there's some situations or windows in which you can adapt more easily, or are forced to adapt. That the system, the biology itself, that a war experience, that a sexual abuse experience could end up leaving an imprint in the system, quite profound. So then how do you undo that? How do you decondition that? And so then this idea, this theory that the psychedelic substances can help you somehow, reopen the possibility to recondition the system. So these are still theories and concepts, but that is the practice. That is what it feels like. That is the experience of it with people. And so I think it's relevant. So people are exploring that, in the research world.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So from one perspective, it sounds like you're really kind of coming from it from, like, a Western lens, from the psychology, psychiatry perspective. And, there's times when I've heard, just this idea of, like, opening a window, maybe in transpersonal or spiritually oriented, like, are you opening this spiritual window? Like, what is that about when you enter into these transpersonal states? And then it's the same. It's the same.
Ultimately, it's the same. So then this is the thing. It's like, because everyone's, this is part of the issue in Western culture. It's always like, oh, you're from this. Let me put this hat on. Let me put that hat on. Oh, I'm going to put this hat on. I'm going to put that hat on. And it's like, no, it's like one life.
Yeah.
And so if whatever thing that's opening in the neuroscience is also having things on the spiritual dimension, that people experience. Not on the emotional dimension that people experience, and on the physical dimension that people experience. So something simple like the default mode network, like functioning in the psilocybin research study is altered, to a degree. They see very high, prevalence of mystical experience. So then whatever they want to call that, or like somehow, diminish that. But for the person, the real person, and not some piece of paper that they're just going to push back and forth. Here, oh, here, oh, here, oh, here.
Yeah.
But like when you're actually going through it, or you talk to the real person that it happened, it's like, look what happened in your default window infection on this neuroimaging. Oh my God, what was happening during that? Oh my holy smokes! I was just, talking to God. And so you see these things happen together. So that's the funny thing. And so we can compartmentalize it for the discussion, which is reasonable. We're trying to figure out all the different angles, but the reality is it's being studied in an actual living human being.
Right.
Not a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And so that living human being's experience, if we really want to talk about the totality of that, this window that we're talking about is like it's trying to reopen a window of emotional development, like programming, attachment disorder programming that may have happened when they were an infant, or a child. Trying to open them to spirit, to like that they would have experiences that would like redefine or at least challenge or open their mind to other concepts of what their life is, what their life means to them, what they feel like their purpose might be. What do they believe about themselves? How do they relate to themselves? How do they relate to their loved ones? So there's a window there. They had a window in their like thinking process and their neuroscience, or like, oh, I always thought about this. I thought I was like this. And I somehow peeled back down this layer and I remembered, oh, I used to be like that. What happened? How come I always think like this? And just open that kind of like layer. So all these things are interrelated. And so that's why the holistic approach or the holistic system, like, for example, the indigenous perspective, does not struggle with that. They don't treat it like it's two separate things that just, that are basically an argument, that are a debate. Right. It's actually, no, this is in continuum with that. So these are different dimensions of the same thing. My space-time existence exists within the milieu of whatever consciousness, quantum physics, like those things are not separated from, we understand them to be aspects of.
Yeah.
So so that's why it's important, because when you have an indigenous kind of perspective, or the issue is when you have this Western perspective, you see where all these struggles happen.
Right.
It's such a struggle. So then we say, well, let's bring some other philosophies into the mix. This particular philosophy is showing its limitations. We can see its limitations. So let's invite another philosophy. Because why? Because for our well-being, for our health, because we're running into limitations, we're looking for solutions, we're worried about this person who's sick, who's suffering, we want to help them. So we open our minds to other perspectives. And so one of the perspectives from the indigenous, as an example, is like, the foundational understanding of like the interconnectedness of all things. Mm-hmm. Like these are basic teachings of like, Native American, for example. You could go to other cultures. The interconnectedness of all things is like, if you're not ready to accept that, then we're not ready to move forward. That's like in the arithmetic of like, we can't learn algebra until we learn 1 + 1 = 2. So it's like, here we are. This is the kindergarten. these are the first steps. So it's like we're not going to wait until quantum physics shows us, yes, it's showing us that.
Right.
We're not going to wait to show all the ecological relationships and the way they are, the butterfly effect or this. We know it now. We know that the interconnectedness of all things is important, and that also extends into every dimension. In other words, whether that's our thoughts or our emotions or our belief system or our physical bodies, or our relationships or our society or our ecosystem or, our place in the universe. So those things are there. So now we have a holistic perspective to move forward on. And it's great because it allows for more reality, We don't have to try to figure out how does that doesn't fit into the model.
Right.
And so maybe I shouldn't think that. It's like, okay, but that's not working out.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the model that's too limited. So we should expand the model. So that's the idea of bringing a holistic perspective, whatever is the term that people are comfortable with, is okay. But we say spirit, coming from that kind of a background, but we mean it more in a universal spirituality, not to be confused with some kind of religious dogma or religious trauma. We're not asking people what's the name of your God.
Right.
We're saying like what when you look within, what do you see and feel?
I like that. I'm curious, as the psychedelic renaissance and research progresses, and just thinking about the importance of a lot of indigenous perspectives, I guess, what are some things that you found really helpful studying from a lot of elders, and what are some of the challenges of trying to integrate that into the Western framework of psychedelic therapies?
Right. Well, first I would say that, in the one of the most rapidly expanding areas is the ketamine, right? Mm-hmm. Ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So while people are waiting for this MDMA breakthrough to happen into some kind of legal situation, people have been exploring ketamine assisted psychotherapy and saying, hey, you know what? These techniques that I learned with working with people with MDMA, I'm able to apply them to people on ketamine, and we're seeing some similar results. Maybe we have to do it more often or more frequently or something like that, but maybe we can get it to happen. And then there's those people, that they just want to do ketamine, just infuse ketamine. I don't even want to talk to them. Goodbye, so long. And that's out there, but, I don't know how are their results, how good are their results. That matters. People, where do they want to spend their money? And so then the ones who are doing this psychotherapy with the ketamine, I find over and over again that they become very curious about the sacred. Because issues around sacredness, like that being your actual direct experience of this holistic union of the universe, that people start having experiences like that, and that they start, having experiences, transpersonal experiences, as you mentioned, which some people call transpersonal psychology, like the Western study of spirituality, just to bridge it all back together again.
Yeah.
And so those people want to know about people that have experience with this from that perspective, from a spiritual perspective. Because you can tell them these molecules did this and these neural patterns did that, but they're not satisfied. It doesn't answer the questions that they're seeking about what do I do with that? How do I, if I experience that, where do I go with that? And so I find those people there's just a growing body, a growing number of people, and a growing interest into how does a spiritual perspective or that dimension play into all of this. And so the indigenous traditions, they have experience with that, right? They have open experience with that question. They don't have to sit around and hide their thoughts about that or beat them. Oh my God, I don't think that. They don't have to do all that stuff. They can just talk about these things openly. That's how it was at Nihue Rao in Peru. We didn't have to ask that question. Is this okay to say this? Because I felt this. I experienced this. Is this going to be embarrassing for me to tell you that this is what came through my mind? Is that okay to? In other words, so there's the traditional perspective is experienced, and not necessarily. I mean, there's baggage, right? There's baggage and there's ignorance in every tradition.
Yeah.
So we watch out for that. No matter what the tradition, what the teacher, that's always, it's human, and we contaminate it, but still there's also the study and the search of trying to uncover. What was the pearl that was trying to be uncovered and revealed, that was the goal of some of the people that were sticking to the tradition. And so they're trying to expose something, and they have experience around helping people get to that, allowing those other perspectives to be there. So it's like, okay, the interconnectedness of all things, having people, really, like I said, look inward, and how are they relating to themselves, and why do they relate to themselves? I mean, if that's psychological, okay, people can relate to that, but then some kind of connection beyond, and this idea that when that there is such a thing as the nourishment, that people receive from feeling connected. Like, what is the foundation of transpersonal psychology? Why is it such a big deal when people get into transpersonal states? What are they accessing? Is there something for them there that helps to regenerate them?
Yeah.
Is that part of the natural, functioning of the system, of the apparatus? That the apparatus is actually designed to feel a sense of belonging, on this earth. And so reconnecting to all those pathways, and then doing it within like a natural setting. So now when we're trying to learn, how do we hold it in our awareness that there's everything is interconnected. And so we're conscious of that. And then, like nature, we go sit in nature and we experience that. Whether people accept it or they don't like to talk about it that way, I believe that's how it is. With the trees and everything around you, to me, it is conscious, that to whatever degree you want to say that, but to me, yeah, I would say that environment to me is conscious of the interconnectedness of all things, in the sense that it is aware and interacts with everything around it all the time. And it does that without judgment. The nature holds the space like that.
Yeah.
And so then it's the example to teach how to do that for ourselves. It's an example. So learning from that, the example of that silence, of meditation in nature and connection to nature, and all the wisdom that it imparts, in things as simple as that. So now a loving community that's trying to create itself and form itself, it's like now it has the example. Okay, our loving community needs to be in awareness of the interconnectedness of all things all the time. And we need to hold space for each other without judgment. So now I am like a tree treating somebody else,
I love that.
like somebody that is sitting there under the tree.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so those kind of relationships, the kind of experience that people have from connecting to, let's say, their natural environments, which the indigenous perspectives have that, that's one of their, interesting kind of like things, is that because some of these cultures have been more stable with their ecosystems for longer periods of time, that harmony is accessible. The concept of that is not just a dream. It's not just a myth or a legend. It's a thing, to live in harmony with nature, in the sense that there would be food for their kids and food for their grandkids and food for their great-grandkids, and you don't have to worry that you're going to destroy the world with how you're living. That, oh my God, which generation is going to be the one that's going to inherit, the nightmare. So that not that they aren't participating now in what's happening, but that there were the periods of time that they were able to access that kind of consciousness in their society.
Yeah.
And they say that is through, like, there's a spiritual dimension that you have to acknowledge in order to enter that kind of consciousness. Like, you won't be able to figure it out just by running the numbers.
Right.
So there's that kind of like, those are examples of like that. And so then it plays into it further with the ceremony of like, okay, like holding space for somebody, techniques around, simple techniques is like something that keeps coming up. We're going to do a lecture with the U of A Center for Integrative Medicine, like susto, like soul loss, like concepts like that, like this idea of soul retrieval. So again, these probably have a lot of dimensions that could be translated over to, that's something I suggest in my book. It's like, could this be like the way the default mode network is interacting with the limbic system, and that's leading to sensory integration issues. So like the scarred past is like blocking out parts of your actual, what you feel inside yourself, because those had to be blocked out to protect you, from overwhelming voltage during a heavy abuse or a heavy trauma. So you just go numb inside and you cut yourself off from some of the interoception, some of the things that you feel in your body, in your heart, in your being, or as simple as some people that they're like numb from like the sex stuff, they don't feel as much because it's just cut off to them. And then they go through this healing process of like this, like what we would call like a soul retrieval, and they're able to kind of like bring these things back online again. There's a more whole like perception of the self, they feel more embodied, and like that kind of techniques around helping people to do that, that's a thing, that's a whole tradition. So whether people believe in that or not, or they see the utility of that or not, but you open it up to the practice and see. And so like the Shipibos in Peru, they're saying, yeah, we want to share our techniques, we want to show you what we've learned, and working with the spirit and working with that kind of stuff. So there's the singing and all that kind of the energetics of that, but then there's other concepts of like, this is what that person needs. We have to walk them down this process, and so there's other processes that might be very like culturally specific. That might be like, when we talk to the Navajo community here, there's some stuff that may be just like so culturally specific that maybe, it's not for everybody. It's like your family does things that other families don't do. And then there are other like more universal things, that we keep running into as they start communicating to each other more and more, as we start communicating with them more and more, revealing some of the more universal like concepts around what might be useful to people. And so I think there's just a lot of knowledge and wisdom on the energetic side of things that have to do with like how we feel inside ourselves, our heart and soul, as we say. Yeah. That the other side is not ready to even talk about, and what is considered too unprofessional.
Yeah.
Although they do, of course, in psychology and all that, people will get, but I'm saying like an academic publication, it's like the party line. And so it's allowing like that heart space to be dealt with, but at a very advanced level. Like, and it's not just people, they've studied it, they've dedicated their lives to working with people, helping people. So like this lady Josie, Josie, you're going to hear from Josie on January 27th for the people interested. Her and her husband, like, she's an educator, she's a teacher, so she's very functional in the Western, world. Very articulate person, very well-spoken person, very present, though. Like, you get this added bonus, like, oh, wow, a very present person, And then what's more, it's like, oh, a lot of experience, like working with people, helping people. And it's like, how have they helped people? What have they helped people with? Well, it's actually quite an extensive list, But of course, because of all this like historical trauma and the relationship between the cultures, there hasn't been a lot of like sharing here.
Right.
And so that has all the reasons that there is for that to be the way that it is. But now we're saying now is a time to reopen those channels and let people know. And so for me, it was like going down to Peru and watching them heal people or help people to heal in ways that we weren't getting. I hadn't seen anything like that ever.
Yeah.
So
I was going to
that would
ask,
be,
like, what has your process been, and has like adopting or understanding these concepts been difficult for you in that, like, being Western trained and seeing some of this stuff where you're like, hey, what's going on here? Or, like, how do I believe in
yeah, but
this?
I don't call it difficult, because again, it's like, science is not my religion.
Mm,
For some people, I do think that it is.
yeah.
And you can tell because when it gets challenged, they start getting very emotional, just the way you poke somebody's like, let's say they're like, I mean, this is an extreme example, but let's say some Taliban Muslim, or even some evangelical Christians, you start asking too many questions about Jesus, they start getting mad,
Right.
It's like, well, why are you getting mad? It's like, because they think you're insulting their family, their culture. So then scientific culture becomes about that. Like, it starts turning into some kind of like position,
Yeah.
And so then, but for me, it's like the actual spirit of science is like to observe, to learn,
Yeah. It's a
to share
great method.
information. Yeah, it's a method, and it's like it's evolving. It's trying to show proof and evidence, but then it's not. It wasn't about like discarding, the evidence of your own subjective experience.
Yeah.
That is a kind of a manipulation, I believe. And so for me, it was never. So then, in that case, it's like it's always about the healing the people. If you're a doctor, and then you find out that these people can legitimately help someone, not like just because you heard or I understand trying to get out the quackery and fight the that kind of stuff, but you find out that whoa, they really help somebody
Yeah. Yeah. You can't
that
really
we couldn't
dismiss
help.
that, right? When you see
You
change
can't,
on
you
that.
shouldn't. If you're
Yeah.
a doctor, if you care, you don't. In general, if you care, you don't.
Yeah.
It's not like it's not like you're gonna swear that we don't touch that stuff because I've sworn to this oath. It's like, well, the Hippocratic Oath does not like preclude such things, and was written in a time when those things were just wide open,
Right.
like no question.
Yeah. Think about the healing dream temples, right? And all that stuff back
Or
in
like the
ancient Greece.
Eleusinian, thing,
Mysteries.
and that's where I think I don't know Plato and Aristotle. I guess they went there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
They're
know,
all
according to
initiates.
I'm reading, right? They were initiated, and so they the idea of the mystical side of the mystical dimension of life, alive and well at the time that was written, from what I understand.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's like why I get with their, with the trying to be careful and responsible, of course. But so for me, it never was really that big of a challenge because it's like if I see the person get better, that's what I talk about in my book. Like, I try to use this example that's real obvious. Is like the guy with the Crohn's disease who's having, bloody diarrhea. Like, so I just use that as like, okay, let's use that. Has bloody diarrhea. You can follow him around every day. There's bloody diarrhea. And then you follow him around the next bunch of days and there's no bloody diarrhea.
Mm.
So I'm not trying to tell you to, believe what I believe or think what I think or whatever. I'm saying like check his underwear and like tell me what you see.
And was
And,
ayahuasca like the healing component there? Or I
and
should say
that was
healing
it.
component, one of them.
Plant diet, it was a huge context.
Yeah.
Advanced healers, ayahuasca medicine, traditional Shipibo diet, Ohe, master plant diet, So all those factors. And, long integration process and continued support, further investigation of things that were revealed in the ayahuasca that had to be verified.
Yeah.
But the point is that that's going to affect people's belief systems, just as much as some studies they're going to see, that's going to really impact them when that happens to them in their life and the person, his family, his close loved ones are like, whoa, what was that? It's like, oh, well, there's no explanation for that. So, just please, sir, excuse yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that doesn't mean anything to him, So, but there are those people that come down, and I think it is the Western person that I find working in Peru, that really struggles with like when their worldview is challenged.
Right.
The indigenous person, I did not experience that. You know, they would have, whoa, oh my God, I saw, you know, some people come to drinks for the first time. They're just like, wow, yeah, I saw a lot of stuff. That was amazing. But they don't like, oh my God, you know, what should I, it's not challenging their worldview to expand beyond what they have imagined.
Right.
Whereas this is like, why is it so like, why are you holding on so tight? I get it. You know, it's not, it's scary to let go, but letting go is like, it's more vulnerable. It's more emotional. And so if your society and your culture does not like make space for those things,
Yeah.
then it's harder.
Yeah, this is a conversation that I often chat with one of my teachers, Lenny Gibson. For those that have been listening, you've heard us talk about Lenny. He's our breathwork teacher. But, you know, he's been bumping up against this thing about integration. It's just having this split, kind of like this Newtonian Cartesian split in the paradigm that we live in, you know, just saying like, oh, the spiritual or transpersonal is separate of my experience. This is why we struggle with integration, because it's separated. And kind of what you're saying, I think you said way back in the beginning, is no, it's all here, right? It's all the same to some degree.
We would go as far to say like, it's just, I mean, of course you have to respect the person and their process. But it's like inevitable. That's the experience that, you know, I would say. I mean, a lot of people don't believe that. They don't, but I just feel like, you know, when they lay down to die, you know, they will be asking themselves these questions. And that is the most common phenomenon that you observe when you watch people die. So it's just a matter of like, why does it have to be separate? Like, why would it be separate? And it's not separate, like, I don't think in sports. I don't think they try to get people to try to like dissociate from like their intuition and their feeling. I think they encourage it like strongly.
Right. I mean, I guess from the sports language, like talking about flow and tapping into that, right? And
no, they'll say he's possessed. You know, they'll say that person is like, you know, inspired. You know, similarly with music.
Yeah.
You know.
Get in that
so
zone.
you wouldn't have that like, I'm not going to try to feel into my soul while I'm on stage. Like that's not, it's actually the opposite is the discussion quite often, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think so.
Isn't that what sells tickets like all over the world?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that what distinguishes like the big ticket sellers in general? You know, that they're able to tap into something that is transpersonal.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's simply this other side of kind of, there's something about the scientific community that is like struggles with this. And, you know, I would say that a lot of that to me has to do with that it's been discouraged, this vulnerable, you know, emotional space. And when you're more cerebral of a person, you know, well, it's easier to get by without going into those spaces.
Yeah.
And so then there's like, so that's the compassion that we have for kind of like some of the thought leaders, that they just, they have not been held without judgment. And so for that reason, they're uncomfortable with this vulnerable emotionality.
Yeah.
And I would maybe say that that's what that whole thing is about. Like, well, spirit's over here, transpersonal's over there, but I'm over here. It's like, what do you mean? You know?
Yeah.
No, like, really, what do you mean? You know, and I think that what do you mean conversation, like, it ends up getting kind of vulnerable and personal. And, you know, once you connect to the person at that level of that emotional depth, then those questions are not as, like, distracting.
Yeah. You brought up Johns Hopkins a little bit earlier, and I forget if we were recording, but we did an interview, and I'm not too sure if you read one of Matt Johnson's papers just on the concept of integrating spirituality into the therapy room. And that paper was kind of oriented towards the research, which I get, you don't want to be, putting your beliefs onto the participant. And I remember we recorded with Dr. Johnson about this in one of our podcasts. People can go back and listen to it. But I wonder, like, your perspective, like, how do you weave spirit or kind of like a spirituality into the clinical space, and is that even appropriate? Because I know a lot of people that have had experienced ayahuasca more in this plant medicine space, that we'll call it, and then they want to come back and integrate that into their therapy practice or maybe their medicine practice if you're a doctor. Is that appropriate from an ethical standpoint, or how do we do that?
Well, I mean, I think it was like pretty appropriate, like before, that people were, let's say, people were Christian or Jewish, and maybe they have a few things around their clinic space, maybe they wear a cross, maybe it's obvious, that they're wearing it or something like that. So it's like before that wasn't considered, I guess maybe because it was like prevailing culture. So we thought, oh, that's, it's just fine. That's like everybody's that. So who cares in some communities?
Right. Yeah.
So that was okay. So I don't think it's like so foreign to think that these things exist in those spaces, number one. Number two, is it appropriate? Like, I think that it's inappropriate to try to proselytize and convince people that they need to think a certain way or believe a certain way, to come to a clinic. I do think that, but I think that I think there's a lot of like ketamine assisted psychotherapy clinics, like I said, that are already bringing a lot of like spiritual items, or they have like a little altar. They might use some feathers. They might use some rattles. They've got some, little Ganesh statue over there.
Yeah.
Maybe even some of the really like avant-garde ones will, put Jesus Christ. They'll even use Jesus Christ, if you can believe that. And so, they have these symbols around, and it's just trying to do it in such a way that's like extremely respectful to the client.
Yeah.
In the sense that, if it exists at all, is that disrespectful? Well, I don't know. That could be just a matter of taste. Is it unprofessional? I don't. If you're imposing it on people, I guess. If it's just around, or I just think that the idea of kicking and driving it out is maybe what's slowing everything down. In other words, like, it's not very effective, along the whole conversation that we've been having all this time.
Yeah.
This idea, like, let's keep that stuff out of it. And I get it. I get the respect and the religious stuff. And there's so much like religious trauma and religious kind of warfare, that has to be respected and dealt with. And if you're tending into any one of those spaces, then we get it back into the same story of like, without judgment. So, the spirituality that we're talking about has a universality. It's like, so
it's not tied to one specific, image or God or.
Well, it doesn't. It's not. Even if you like a particular image, it shouldn't affect. Why would it be so negative on the other person walking through?
Right.
If somebody is, if a doctor is Muslim, and they believe in the Quran, or this other doctor is Christian, and it's like into the Bible and stuff, they don't have to like throw it in your face. But could they express that at all? Is that okay for them to be like an honest person about like their spiritual practices? Like, and driving that out of the space, like, what is the benefit?
Right.
So we have to find that balance between, we're trying to keep it, neutral, so that, we're not offending anyone, or we're not making people feel like, it's not a safe place for them. If they say they feel like they're in some, minority that feels threatened by the presence of those kind of symbols. And so, that person has to respect and understand the community that they serve and try to find a balance. But also, like, that community also wants to have that healer or that practitioner at their best.
Yeah.
That's to their benefit, to have them at their best. And if this person feels like they can perform better, if they include some of these elements into their space and into their work, then that's just, that's beyond the institutions.
Yeah. And it makes me
It's not
wonder,
regulation.
yeah, it makes me wonder just how, well, for example, I had my undergrad in transpersonal psychology. I, talk about spiritual emergencies all the time, psychedelic integration. And, I've had clients reach out in the past and almost be really hesitant about disclosing, kind of spiritually oriented themes or really profound transpersonal experiences within like a session, because they're almost like, am I going to get judged for this? Like, how do I so it's interesting to just think about.
Patients say that, or the therapist?
Clients just being hesitant of being like, can I share this? Are you safe enough to share this with? How are you going to perceive this?
Say that.
Yeah, like this really weird experience that happened to me. And it's just interesting, because if they looked at my background, it's like, yes, I'm totally open to a lot of this stuff.
Right.
But so yeah,
but there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that vibe that they just feel like that's not cool. And so I think it's back to that same thing of the confusion around like what we're talking about. Vulnerable, emotional, transpersonal is like going to be treated like crazy or unstable or whatever. And so then they're worried that they're going to get, labeled or just, that people are going to stop listening to them.
Yeah.
That it's not a trusting relationship where they can be themselves. And so there's a lot of that energy. But I'm saying that some of that energy is coming from this other side of like this question of like, should you even be allowed to have like, express your transpersonal stuff as a therapist, if that includes like a religious icon.
Yeah.
It's like, so that same conversation that's driving that out of the clinic space is what's making them feel like that.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how I feel about it as well.
Yeah. So then it's like, that's the point. So, the medicine has to guide the situation, the healing. So we are responsible. We want to be responsible. Number one, that's super important. But being responsible means, are we doing things that are, sandbagging, holding us back?
Yeah. It's a good question.
Like I said, you wouldn't have like some, they wouldn't be like telling the Rolling Stones, like, don't express yourself too much out there tonight, by the way. Wouldn't want you to express yourself.
Freak the audience out a little bit.
Yeah, freak the audience out. It's like, and of course there's that balance, but
totally.
The idea is it's like you're trying to touch into stuff that's very personal, that there is a space deep within, that it's not easy to access. And that's what this work is about, trying to help people access. And so it's not as simple as cookie cutter, Yeah. Cookie cutter is not working. We just need to face the music. Cookie cutter is not working. Even though MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is running through this whole trial, and they have, this thing, it's not a cookie cutter therapy that they're doing.
Right.
They have different therapists with their own personalities that are encouraged to be as advanced as they can be themselves. And what goes on in those therapy sessions is not cookie cutter.
Yeah. I feel like it's hard to cookie cutter the psychedelic space experience.
It's just not. It's not honest.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not honest. It's a matter of maturity, really, with with this kind of work. It's like you just can keep saying that. It's just not. It's not gonna work out.
Yeah.
And so then we have to deal with it. We have to deal with the transpersonal. not only for the sake of like expanding ourselves and our whatever to be better people or grow or whatever people think, but it's like for them, it's a matter of health. That's the reason, you know. And so that we kind of come to the end here. It's like, you know, that's one of my messages and our messages is that in the indigenous tradition, for example, like spirituality and health are basically considered like the same thing, deeply interwoven. In other words, we can't, if we, the transpersonal side of our life, whatever that word is supposed to describe, you know, that everybody has transpersonal experiences, period.
Yeah. Dreams, for example.
Dreams.
Yeah.
So dreams are just this, and the biomolecules is like, okay, yeah, that's probably happening, you know, that's definitely happening. But you never had a weird dream? Like you never did? You never dreamt something that happened or dreamt, you know, talk to a dead person or, you know, like never, or never talked to somebody that did, you know? It's like, okay, so there's some mystical space there. And we're saying that the one argument is that mystical space is not relevant. That doesn't matter. And we're saying, no, it is relevant. And so, you know, the spiritual practices that are designed to help people relate to the sacred. The point is like that they should be nourishing your well-being. So in other words, it goes both ways. So then the mystical side is like, well, just mystical because I believe in this and I want to do this and I like to talk to aliens and, you know, whatever. It's like, no. But how does that ground into you? You know? So I heard you got really high. Oh, I heard you got really high again. And maybe I heard you got really high another time. How's it going with your life? You know, how are you relating to yourself? How are you relating to your close loved ones? How's your other stuff going? You know, like, cause that matters too. Like they're in continuum.
Yeah.
They're in continuum. So now we have a reason to, what's going to guide the discussion is health and well-being. So then we don't have to figure, oh, why? Should we think this? Should I think that? Should I think this? Should I think that? It's like health and well-being is why we're exploring this topic of transpersonal. It's why we're exploring the topic of the mystical, because it's showing itself to be relevant in the psychedelic psychotherapeutic space and the sacred ceremonial space, because these transpersonal mystical experiences are helping to turn people's health around.
Yeah.
And so that's why they're getting the interest. But that's actually always why. You know, the traditional systems have integrated them for health and well-being. And so there are always the little abominations, you know, the people that are going to do it for capital gain, or maybe they're trying to learn witchcraft or figure out how to manipulate people and, you know, through some kind of psychological advertising, you know, attack. But their tradition of like the heart and soul of it is like why it continues is the people that are worried about their loved ones, that are worried about their families.
Right.
And so they want to increase the quality of their life. They want to increase the quality of the lives of the people that they care about. And so that's why they try to learn more about the spirit.
Yeah.
And so that's spiritual well-being, you know, is what guides it, or holistic well-being. So spiritual practice is spiritual healing. Spiritual practice should be measured for its role and contributing to our well-being. You know, then we can kind of like tease out all this extra stuff that's just the people that wanted to kill each other, or I don't know what they had in mind. They're not really, you know, utilizing the transpersonal. And similarly, spiritual practice is spiritual healing. Spiritual healing is spiritual practice. So then when we're doing this kind of work with people, it is a form of spiritual practice. That's okay to say. And that there's these two outcomes that, yes, there's healing that can be promoted and facilitated and supported, and we grow as individuals participating in that kind of work as a patient, as a practitioner. So now exploring psychedelics and sacred plants is like, yes, there is spiritual growth potential. You could use it for that. It can help with that. It's not a guarantee. You have to do your work.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, it also can be healing as well, because those two things go
Hand
hand
in
in hand.
hand.
Because it's in continuum.
I know that we're at the hour, and we said we would try to keep it there. I'm curious. There are some things that you've
Yeah,
said.
I'll
What
take
was
you over here just for a second to deal with
cool?
this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries. There's a few things that you said throughout this interview. When we're talking about ketamine, MDMA, one question comes up is around the spirit of that. We've had some people in some of our consultation groups in the past ask, can you have a relationship with ketamine? And some things that you were saying just reminded me of a conversation I had with one of my teachers who is part European, Lakota, and I believe Cherokee. And this was, I don't know, back in like 2010, 2012 or something. I was just asking him about the integration of psychedelics in Western society. And he said, from, my indigenous background, we have relationships with things. It doesn't seem like the West has a relationship with plants or molecules or anything like that. And so I'm wondering if you could just quickly comment on that aspect, the relationality or the relationship with substances and how that actually, or relationship with everything in
Well,
the
I think
world.
that's what we're saying. That's
Yeah.
what's been said, and I think that's worthwhile. So then it's like, okay, just like let's say it's your wine, and so then they know where it grew in the soil, and then the guy's breaking the soil up with his hands, and then there's a little wafting of salt air that flows through the area, and this deep relationship with the way that thing is grown and produced, and then it produces this this wine that they have this very special relationship with. And so when they experience that, these people, they want to know, where did it grow and how did you grow it, and that there's an access to other dimensions of the experience, when you have access to that, when it's like, okay, you hear this CD, yeah, okay, that's cool, but then no, you went to the live show, and then it's like, oh, but then when we went backstage and we met the guy, and then actually we went, like the next day we went and we hung out with him all day, and so now every time I listen to this, it's just like, oh, it takes me back to all that, versus like, oh, here's the CD.
Yeah.
Like, it's a big difference, right? I mean, that's just simple as that. And so then on the traditional side, yeah, when it's about the peyote, it's like, okay, where did you get it from? And that's, and all that stuff. But let's say something else, like the mushrooms of, the Mexico, where did they pick them and how did they do it? And were they praying and did they make offerings when they did it? When I brought ayahuasca in front of a Navajo elder, he's like, well, where did this come from? Did they make offerings when they collected this stuff? Who made it? Who cooked it? What were they thinking about? Were they praying the whole time? And so you just, you could be honest with them about it. Well, this, yes, there is that. Some people do all that. This time, I think they were a little busy. And so I'm not sure they did all that. They love it, they respect it, but they didn't do as much as what you're talking about. And I was like, oh, I like it from this other guy because they pray the whole time and you can feel the difference, So all that kind of stuff. So then so the MDMA, when I went to the MDMA training, the MAPS training with my friend Belinda Iracho, who's Navajo, and Zuni, we wanted to bring a sassafras leaf. We went and found a sassafras leaf. We were in Kentucky. We went and found a sassafras tree. We brought the leaves. We brought it to everybody. Said, this is like the origin, of this. Like they used to get the saffron oil from the roots. The Native Americans showed them how to do that, and that's eventually MDMA is like a couple steps away from that. And then everyone says, well, no, yeah, but this is synthetic. We have synthetics now. Oh, well, what does that mean? It's like, so they say it's like petroleum based. Okay, but where? Like, where did they mine the petroleum? Like, where did they, how many people did they kill? Like, what's going on over there? What's it like to work on that oil rig? And then it turns out, so they were like telling me that, but then we started researching like the components, and then it turns out that one of the components, at least maybe not their MDMA, but the widely produced MDMA all over the world, was like still heavily drawing upon some natural. It was just cheaper to buy from these Cambodians or from these Venezuelans. You can get them to just tear out all these trees and grind up the roots and sell them, so you can do it at Burning Man, and you can do it in Amsterdam, and you can do it, whatever, Coachella, but like you don't know where it's from.
Yeah.
And it turns out, according to this research study, that these Cambodian trees were maybe in danger of extinction, because of the MDMA production, because they say they're getting it from over here, but they're not. So the thing is, you don't know where it's from or how they make it, or it's not farm to table organic.
Yeah.
And then we have the example of ketamine. So it's like, what would that be like to learn about the ketamine? Like, where are they making it? How do they make it? What do they make it out of? Why wouldn't we want to learn that? So that's part of this detachment that we're in, which is part of like the, the distrust and the discomfort that goes on, whether it's the vaccine or whatever it is. It's like, what is this, Well, what am I about to put in my body? Because I have no idea, where they made it, who made it, how they made it, So all that kind of story is like something that could be addressed. So it's like we could have ketamine. We could learn, we could get in touch with a laboratory that's producing it or a pharmaceutical company and find out, like, or have another one, that makes it. And, the little bit that I learned about ketamine, just asking myself this question was like, it's just very interesting. It's like this ketone and this amine, these basic like organic chemistry building blocks, ketone, amine. It's like so fundamental, and you just put them together, and it's ketamine. And it's so it's just kind of wild. Like, what is this? The geometry of this and the chemistry of this, and where is it come from? And so that kind of stuff we could learn about it.
Yeah.
And they did used to know about it, and that's something I teach in my class. Is like, back in the day, ketamine is actually from an alchemical tradition of European little Harry Potter laboratory work, where
Derived
they
from
did know
PCP,
where they were.
right?
Huh?
Derived from PCP, right?
But before that,
Yeah.
Before that, the tradition of tinkering around with little things that you dig up out of the ground and mix this and mix that and get gold and get this and arsenic, like that's been going on for thousands of years. I think a lot, mostly in Eurasia is like one of kind of the more famous tradition, but then, within England and Europe, Western Europe is like, very influential and gave rise to the more modern pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
Like it's that tradition. That tradition was very interwoven with alchemy and their thoughts, and they, as far as how do they learn, how to mix this and get this, and how do they arrive at some of those things? The same way that people ask, how did they figure out how to make ayahuasca out of these two plants? Those are questions, that people don't even ask anymore around this other pathway. But those are influences. Those are real influences of traditional kind of nature-connected culture that gave rise to what is ketamine today. So those kind of things is like, it's worth thinking about.
Yeah.
It's worth understanding because it brings that extra dimension, It takes you into that backstage pass experience.
It's important. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for hanging out for the extra 13 minutes or so. I want to respect your time. So to wrap up here, where can people find your work? You have Fellowship of the River out for the book. People can check
the one thing I got going on right now, we're trying to promote. We're going to go on pause. We're exploring a Patreon.
Cool.
With like having discussions on Patreon, and that's available through modernspirit.org. So people can look on modernspirit.org and they can see our other work, which is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for Indigenous people and learning about ceremony as it connects to that. It's also a reciprocity project. That's the reciprocity project. We're also doing we have a relationship with Cultural Tras La Huella in Colombia that's producing small like documentaries and clips of talking to a lot of Indigenous teachers down there, trying to translate that stuff, put it into English subtitles so people can access it here and learn from these ayahuasca and traditional people and other people working with substances and sacred plants. And then we also have the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project, which is still ongoing. It's still waiting to publish the first results of that. So that's all rolling out Modern Spirit. Then I have drjoetafur.com, just my own personal website, and they can look at things there. We're going to do a river course, another course based on my book in a little while in April. And then there's the Church of Eagle and Condor, .org, where people can learn about our work as a spiritual community. So those are the three things I got going on. Fellowship of the River, you get links through drjoetafur.com. And that's kind of my little network of activity.
Awesome. And it sounds like you're going to be doing some webinars from the Eagle and the Condor. People be sure to check that out.
That's what we want to tell people about. When would this air? Do you know how?
think pretty
conversation.
soon. So this might be
it's January 27th. You can get it on Church of Eagle and Condor.org. You can get the Eventbrite link and come join us. And this same level of discussion, all these questions we're having, it's like, okay, let's ask Josie the Gay James. She lived her life in the tradition, and her husband is a very traditional man. And they want to talk a little bit more than they have in the past. Yeah. And I think it's useful. Everyone says, why is it useful? Why do you think it's useful? It's not useful, the same thing again. I'm saying because I think it's useful. I really mean useful, for your health, useful. Yeah. And so come and check it out.
Will replay be available, in case people are listening to this way into the future?
Eventually we will. We will release it, I think, in some form.
Sweet.
Through the church, just for people to understand.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Joe Tafur, really appreciate your time. Appreciate all your insights and wisdoms here. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.